In the silence after war, even the wind seems to whisper names the earth has forgotten. The boy walked alone through what used to be a city, now only bones and echoes. Snow fell in slow, trembling flakes, gathering over roofs that no longer belonged to anyone. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Beneath his torn coat, his ribs ached from hunger, and his fingers were red from cold. Yet in one pocket he carried something that made him keep moving. A worn envelope with his name written in faded ink. The streets were ghosts. Each window was a mouth of darkness, each step a prayer. Somewhere, far behind the sound of the wind, a bell rang, faint, cracked, like an old memory refusing to die. He stopped and looked up at the gray sky, wondering if his mother could hear it too, wherever heaven had taken her. He didn't know how long he had been walking, maybe days, maybe forever. Hunger had stopped being a pain, it was now a quiet shadow inside him. He pressed the envelope against his chest. It was the only thing that still felt warm. A gust of wind tore through the alley, carrying with it a paper that brushed against his legs. He picked it up, a photograph half-burned. It showed a family in front of a house with tall windows and ivy-covered walls. He didn't recognize them, yet something about the boy in the picture, the way he held his mother's hand, felt familiar. He put it in his pocket beside the envelope and kept walking. At the edge of the city he found what used to be a bridge. Only half remained, like a broken promise over the frozen river. He sat on the edge and took the envelope out again. The ink had run in places but the seal was still intact, dark red wax cracked with age. He traced it with his thumb, afraid to open it, afraid that hope might slip away like everything else. He waited until the snow thickened, hiding the ruins behind a white curtain. Then carefully he tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper, folded twice. The handwriting was uneven, written in a hand that trembled. To the boy named Elias. If this finds you, know that what was once lost can be found again. Go to the place called Hollow Street. There you will find what was meant for you. He read it again and again, the words lighting something inside him that the war had almost buried, the faint, stubborn glow of belief. Hollow Street. He didn't know where it was but he whispered the name like a prayer. Hollow Street. It sounded both empty and full of promise. That night, he built a small fire beneath the bridge using broken boards and a piece of his own sleeve. The flames flickered weakly, licking the cold air. He held his hands close, imagining they were his mother's hands instead, gentle, warm, safe. When the fire began to fade, he lay down and watched the sky. The stars were barely visible through the clouds, but one shone brighter, pale, steady like an eye watching over him. Maybe, he whispered, that's where you are. Before sleep took him, he pressed the envelope against his heart and murmured the words again. Hollow Street. Tomorrow I'll find it. Morning came slowly, crawling across the ruins like a wounded animal. The light was pale and cold, the kind that made every shadow seem alive. Elias awoke beneath the half-collapsed bridge, his breath rising in small clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. The fire was gone, leaving only a thin trace of smoke curling upward into the gray sky. He sat up, rubbing his hands together to bring back the feeling in his fingers. The letter, that single piece of fragile paper, lay beside him, weighted by a small stone so it wouldn't blow away. He lifted it again, reading the same lines over and over until he could whisper them by heart. Go to the place called Hollow Street. There you will find what was meant for you. He didn't know who had written it. There was no signature, no date. Only those words and a small folded key taped to the corner of the page. Old brass, its teeth worn down by time. He turned it in his hand, watching it glint faintly in the winter light. The key felt heavy, heavier than something made of metal should. It felt like memory. Elias stood and looked out toward the horizon. The city stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of hollow windows and forgotten names. Somewhere beyond it there had to be a place still standing, a place called Hollow Street. The name haunted him. It sounded like something out of a story his mother used to tell when the world still had warmth in it. He began to walk. The snow had turned to slush and his boots, 2 sizes too big, filled with water. Every step made a soft squelching sound but he kept going. He passed burned-out cars, crumbling walls painted with slogans that meant nothing now and shop fronts covered in frost. The world was quiet except for the crows. They perched on telephone wires, black against the white sky, calling to each other in voices that echoed off the empty buildings. By noon he reached what had once been the city's edge. A single road wound out into the countryside, where the trees stood like tall, thin sentinels. There, painted faintly on a weathered sign, he saw it, the word Hollow. The rest of the name had been rubbed away by wind and time, but it was enough. His chest tightened. Hollow Street. It was real. He followed the road. 4 hours he walked, the snow deepening around his ankles. The silence became so complete that he could hear the blood beating in his ears. Once he thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, there was only the wind. Then out of the whiteness came a sound, soft, uncertain. A whimper. He froze. From behind a pile of debris, a small shape emerged. A dog, thin, mud-colored, its fur tangled and matted. Its ribs showed through the coat. It looked at him with wary eyes, tail tucked low. Elias knelt slowly and reached into his pocket, pulling out the last crust of bread he had. "Here," he whispered, his voice gentle as falling snow. "You need it more than I do." The dog crept closer, step by step, until its cold nose brushed his hand. It took the bread carefully, then sat beside him, chewing. For a long moment they just looked at each other, two souls adrift, bound by hunger and silence. Then Elias stood and began walking again. The dog followed. By the time the sun began to sink behind the skeletal trees, the air had grown colder. The sky turned the color of ash and a faint mist curled along the ground. The dog walked a few paces ahead now as if it knew the way. Elias smiled weakly. "Maybe you do," he said aloud. "Maybe you were sent to lead me." When darkness came, he found shelter in what was left of a train station. Roof half gone, benches splintered, a clock frozen forever at 12. He made a small nest of rags in one corner and shared his last piece of food with the animal. The dog curled against him, warm despite its thin frame. For the first time in many nights, Elias did not dream of bombs or fire. He dreamed of a key turning in a lock, and of a door opening into light. In the morning, he awoke to find the dog still beside him, watching with quiet eyes. The fog outside had thickened, but in the distance he could see rooftops. Real ones. Smoke rose faintly from one chimney, a sign of life. He reached for his pocket, feeling the letter and the key. "We're close," he whispered. The dog wagged its tail just once. He stepped out into the mist, the sound of snow crunching beneath his feet. Ahead, through the haze, a street sign leaned at an angle, nearly swallowed by ivy. The letters were barely visible beneath the frost, but he could still read them. Hollow Street. Elias stood still for a long time, his breath trembling. The key felt warm in his hand. Whatever waited for him here, it had survived the war, the cold, and even time itself. And as he took his first step down that forgotten road, he whispered to the wind, "I'm here." The road to Hollow Street was not a road at all. It was a trail of broken stones and forgotten footsteps. Each step Elias took crunched against the frost, echoing faintly through the fog. Beside him trotted the thin dog, its fur still wet from the morning dew. Together they looked like two shadows crossing the edge of the world. The sun rose weakly, a pale circle struggling to pierce the gray sky. The landscape was a quilt of ruins, barns collapsed into the earth, cars half buried in snow, power lines swaying like strings of an abandoned instrument. Every now and then Elias would stop and listen, hoping to hear something human, a voice, a cough, a song. But there was only the sound of the wind moving through hollow windows. He spoke to the dog to fill the silence. "I think I'll call you Ash," he said softly. The dog tilted its head, ears twitching. "You look like you came from a fire." Elias, the mist did not lift for days. It clung to the earth like sorrow that refused to let go. Elias walked through it with the dog at his side, their shadows barely visible against the pale morning light. The air smelled of old rain and ashes. Somewhere far away, a church bell rang once and then fell silent. The world seemed asleep, a world that had forgotten what warmth was. He passed rows of houses standing like broken teeth, their doors hanging open, their windows shattered. Once he found a child's toy in the snow, a wooden horse missing one wheel. He picked it up, brushed the frost off its back and placed it on a stone. "You'll wait for your owner here," he murmured. His voice sounded strange in the silence, as if it came from another life. The dog trotted ahead, sniffing the air. Sometimes it would stop, ears twitching before bounding forward again. Elias had named him Ash for his color and for the world they came from. Ash seemed to understand things Elias didn't. He would bark once when danger neared, loose boards, thin ice, broken glass, then return to walk beside him. By the second day, Elias's strength began to fade. His stomach hurt from emptiness, his lips cracked and bled. He kept his hand inside his pocket, gripping the key for courage. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the letter, the handwriting of a stranger, yet it called to him like blood calls to blood. At dusk, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the outline of a hill ahead. On top of it stood something tall, A building, old and dark, its roof sagging under years of neglect. His heart quickened. "That must be it," he whispered. "It has to be." They climbed slowly, slipping on patches of ice. The wind grew stronger near the summit, carrying the smell of damp wood and something faintly sweet, maybe the ghost of bread once baked here. The building loomed larger with every step. Stone walls cracked like dry skin, windows blind with dust, ivy crawling upward as if trying to hold it together. A sign above the gate read, "No. 7, Hollow Street." The numbers were barely legible. Elias stopped at the gate and stared. His breath came out in visible puffs, the dog pressing close to his leg. The house seemed to watch them. He reached out and touched the gate. The metal was cold, biting at his fingers. It creaked open slowly like an old man sighing. Snow had piled against the steps, hiding the shape of the entrance. Elias brushed it away with his sleeve, revealing a wooden door painted long ago, pale blue, now faded almost to gray. He took the key from his pocket. Its brass surface glowed faintly even in the dull light. With trembling hands he placed it in the keyhole. It didn't fit. He tried again, turning, pressing, whispering to it like a prayer. The metal scraped but refused to turn. Defeated, he leaned his forehead against the wood. "Why would you send me here," he whispered, "if I cannot enter?" Ash barked softly, tail flicking. He walked around to the side of the house, disappearing behind the ivy. Elias followed, brushing branches aside. There near a cracked window he saw it, a small break in the glass big enough for a boy his size. The dog pawed at the snow beneath it, whining. Elias nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll try." He wrapped his coat tighter and climbed through. The window groaned under his weight but held. Inside the air was thick with dust and something older, the scent of wood, candle wax and time. His footsteps echoed faintly as he landed on the wooden floor. The boards creaked like voices whispering secrets. The room was dark, save for thin lines of light breaking through the shutters. Sheets covered the furniture and cobwebs hung like lace. It looked as though someone had left in a hurry and never returned. On the wall, faintly visible beneath the dust, was a cross, wooden, hand-carved and cracked through the middle. Elias touched it gently. The wood felt warm against his fingertips. "Were you here when they prayed?" he asked softly. Ash jumped in through the window and landed beside him, shaking off snow. The sound echoed in the silence. Elias smiled faintly and whispered, "Welcome home." He wandered through the first room, his candle lighting patches of forgotten life. A clock stopped at 4:17, a cracked teacup, a framed picture turned face down. He turned it over. It showed a man standing beside a workbench, smiling, sawdust in his hair. The boy in the photo, barely 5 years old, had the same eyes as Elias. The flame flickered. The walls seemed to draw closer. Somewhere deep within the house, a sound stirred, faint and rhythmic, like breathing or distant music. Elias turned sharply, heart pounding. Ash growled low. But the sound faded as quickly as it came, swallowed by the quiet. He stood there for a long time, his candle trembling in the draft, feeling both fear and belonging. "Someone lived here," he whispered. "Someone like me." He didn't know yet that this place would become his sanctuary, or that what waited inside would not only reveal who he was, but what he was meant to rebuild. Outside, the wind howled against the shutters. Inside, the boy and the dog huddled beside the dying candle, their shadows touching the walls. 2 survivors, 2 flickers of light in a house that remembered prayer. The house did not welcome him at first. It groaned under its own memories, its walls shifting with every gust of wind. The air was colder inside than out, as if the walls themselves refused to forget the winter of their abandonment. Elias stood in the hallway, his candle trembling. Shadows bent across the floorboards like thin fingers reaching from another time. Ash sniffed the corners, nose twitching. The faint sound of his claws against the wood echoed through the rooms. Elias followed him, step by careful step, his breath soft and uneven. The air smelled of mildew, old smoke and something faintly metallic, the ghost of years gone by. Everywhere there were signs of a life once lived. A coat still hung on a hook by the door. A pair of boots sat near the stairs, half buried in dust. The walls were lined with shelves of books swollen with moisture. When Elias brushed one open, flakes of paper drifted down like ash. He walked deeper. His candlelight caught a mirror, tall, cracked across its center. He stopped. In its fractured surface he saw not one reflection but many. A boy, a soldier's shadow, a child holding a letter. His own face seemed divided between who he had been and who he was becoming. He turned away. At the end of the corridor he found a staircase spiraling upward. The steps groaned beneath his weight, but he climbed anyway. Ash followed close behind, tail brushing against the railing. Upstairs, the rooms were filled with soft light filtering through torn curtains. In one, a sewing machine sat near the window, its wheel frozen mid-turn. In another, a bed still held the shape of someone long gone, the impression of a head on the pillow, a cross above the frame. Elias hesitated at the doorway, lowering his head. "Were you the one who wrote to me?" he whispered. His voice was small in the vast silence. The wind answered, sighing through the broken glass. He sat on the edge of the bed. The candle flickered beside him, casting small circles of light across the walls. He reached into his coat and unfolded the letter again, tracing the handwriting. "Go to the place called Hollow Street. There you will find what was meant for you." The words felt heavier now that he was here. What had been meant for him? The key, the letter, this building that seemed to recognize his steps. They were pieces of something larger, something waiting to be understood. Ash barked softly, breaking the quiet. He had found a narrow door at the back of the room, half hidden behind a wooden wardrobe. Elias pushed the wardrobe aside, the floor creaking beneath him. Behind it, the door waited, old, with flaking paint and a lock covered in rust. He tried the brass key again. This time it slid in more easily, turning with a soft click. Elias froze. His breath caught in his chest. Slowly he pushed the door open. The hinges moaned, releasing a breath of colder air that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Inside was a narrow hallway leading downward, stone steps descending into darkness. At the top of the stair, a small wooden cross hung on a nail, crooked but intact. Beneath it, words faintly carved into the beam, "Sanctuary of Light." Elias hesitated. Fear and faith warred quietly inside him. Then he whispered, "If there's light, I'll find it," and began to descend. The air grew stiller as he went down. His candle flame bent and wavered, revealing walls lined with old bricks, each marked with handprints, some small, some large. He touched one. The dust came away on his fingers like memory. At the bottom, the passage opened into a wide cellar. Shelves of canned food lined one wall, though most were rusted. A table sat in the center, covered with papers and candle stubs. Someone had lived here, or hidden here. On the far side of the room was another door. Its paint was pale blue like the one upstairs. Elias approached it, his heartbeat slow but strong. The key, still in his hand, felt warm again as though guiding him. He reached out, turned the handle. The door didn't open. He stepped back, confused. Ash began to growl softly, tail low. Then from behind the door came a sound, faint at first, then clearer. A low hum, almost musical, like someone singing through the walls. Elias pressed his ear to the wood. The melody was fragile, trembling, but undeniably human. He closed his eyes. For the first time since the war began, tears filled them, not from grief but from recognition. Someone was still here. The cellar air pressed close around him, still, cold, and heavy with secrets. Elias stood before the pale blue door, his breath clouding in the dim candlelight. The faint hum behind it rose and fell like the rhythm of a lullaby, too soft to be real, yet too steady to be his imagination. Ash whimpered, ears pinned back, tail flicking. The boy knelt beside him, whispering, "It's all right. Maybe someone needs help." His voice trembled. He reached for the handle again. It turned halfway, then stopped. He pulled harder. The wood groaned but held firm. Dust rained down from the beams above. Elias pressed his shoulder against the door and pushed with all his strength, gritting his teeth. The sound inside ceased abruptly, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. Then silence. Elias stepped back, panting. The candle flame wavered in the stillness, then went out, plunging the cellar into darkness. He stood there for a moment, heart pounding in his ears, until he could no longer tell if the ringing he heard was from fear or from memory. He fumbled for his matches, struck one. The brief flare lit the carved words above the door again, "Sanctuary of Light." The flame burned his fingertips. He dropped it, swore softly, and sat down on the cold stone floor. Ash came closer, resting his head on Elias's lap. The boy stroked his fur absent-mindedly, the warmth grounding him. "Why won't it open?" he murmured. "Why bring me here if I can't go inside?" He looked at the key again. It was still warm, impossibly warm, though the cellar air was freezing. He turned it in his palm, studying the teeth. It was old but carefully made, as though it had been shaped for one specific lock. Maybe not this one. Maybe something else. He sighed, leaning back against the wall. The candle had rolled a few feet away. He relit it carefully. Its glow stretched across the stone floor, catching faint markings beneath the dust. Elias brushed the dirt aside, letters carved into the floor itself. For those who knock but cannot enter, wait for the light. The words sent a chill through him. He whispered them aloud, tasting their strange comfort. Wait for the light. He decided to stay. He gathered scraps of wood from a broken shelf and built a small fire in an old metal basin. The flames flickered weakly, sending long shadows dancing along the walls. Ash lay curled beside him, nose tucked under his tail. The warmth was fragile but alive. Elias took the letter from his pocket again. The edges were soft from being handled too much. He unfolded it slowly, reading the words he already knew by heart. To the boy named Elias. Go to the place called Hollow Street. There you will find what was meant for you. He looked around, the cellar, the shelves, the silent door. Was this what you meant? He asked aloud. This place? This silence? No answer came. Only the crackle of fire. He took the small key and set it on the ground beside the candle. Its surface caught the light, throwing a faint golden reflection against the wall. The flame wavered, bending toward the door as though drawn to it. Elias watched, his eyelids heavy. Maybe it will open tomorrow, he whispered. Outside, the wind rose, a long, low moan that moved through the empty hallways above, rattling windows and whispering down the staircase. The house seemed to breathe around him, every beam and wall creaking softly. He fell asleep to the sound of it, his head resting against Ash's fur. In his dream, the blue door was no longer locked. It stood open and light spilled from it, golden, warm, alive. A voice, gentle and familiar, called his name, Elias. He walked toward it, reaching out his hand. But when he touched the frame, the voice changed, became fainter, distant, like a prayer fading into wind. He turned to see a man standing behind him, face half-shadowed, a carpenter's tools hanging from his belt. The man smiled and said, "You're home." Elias woke with a gasp. The fire had burned low. Ash lifted his head, blinking. The candle still burned faintly beside the blue door, its flame steady. Elias rubbed his eyes and stared. The golden reflection on the wall had changed shape. It was no longer just a shimmer of light. It was a symbol, a cross of light and shadow formed perfectly by the candle's glow. The same cross carved into the wall upstairs. Elias rose slowly, heart thudding. He picked up the candle and held it close to the door. The symbol flickered, brighter now. The brass key in his hand began to tremble, as though it recognized the light. He placed the key against the lock once more. A faint click. And then, silence again. The door remained shut. But now, Elias knew something he hadn't before. It wasn't locked anymore. It was waiting. Waiting for the right moment, or perhaps, the right heart. He sat back down by the fire, eyes on the door. The hum began again, softer than before, as if the house was singing him back to sleep. He smiled faintly, whispering, "All right. I'll wait for the light." And for the first time since the war he felt peace. Headphone, if this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share where you're listening from. My dream is to reach 1,000 hearts listening to these quiet stories of faith and rediscovery. Morning came slowly to Hollow Street. Light crept through cracks in the ceiling, spilling thin beams onto the cellar floor. Elias stirred, blinking against the pale gold. The fire had gone out, leaving only a faint smell of smoke and iron. Ash lifted his head and yawned, his breath forming small clouds in the cold. The boy sat up, rubbing his eyes. The memory of the dream clung to him. The man with the carpenter's belt, the voice calling his name, the door that glowed like morning sun. He looked toward that same door now. It was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. The brass key lay where he had left it, dull in the light. He picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. The warmth it once held was gone. Still, he tucked it carefully into his coat. He climbed the narrow stairs back to the upper rooms. The air grew warmer as he rose, filled with the faint scent of dust and wood. The house groaned softly, the sound of old beams stretching, settling, remembering. It no longer felt threatening. It felt alive, like something waking from a long sleep. In the main hall, sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, scattering patterns across the floor. Elias followed them with his gaze, watching the dust move in the light. "It's beautiful," he whispered as though speaking to the house itself. A sudden sound made him freeze, a faint tapping, distant but rhythmic, coming from behind the walls. Tap, tap, tap. He turned his head. It came again, slower this time, like cautious footsteps. Ash growled softly. The boy placed a hand on his head to calm him. "Shh. Listen." The tapping stopped. Then from somewhere near the far corner came another sound, a faint, muffled hum. The same melody he had heard beneath the cellar door. soft, wordless, carrying the rhythm of breath and hope. Elias took a cautious step toward it. "Hello." His voice echoed slightly. "Is someone here?" Only silence answered. He pressed his ear against the wall. It was cold but alive. He could feel faint vibrations under his skin, like a heartbeat buried deep within the wood. "I can hear you," he whispered. "Please, don't be afraid." Ash sniffed the baseboard, then began pawing at one spot where the plaster had cracked. Elias knelt beside him. Beneath the loose flakes of paint, the wood was marked, carved with letters so small he almost missed them. He brushed away the dust until the words revealed themselves. "Listen. The walls remember what love built." He ran his fingers over the letters, heart quickening. Whoever had written this knew the house intimately, knew that it was more than stone and timber. It was a vessel of memory. He stepped back, looking around. The hum began again, clearer now, rising and falling like breathing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The light through the window trembled as if stirred by the sound. Elias felt tears in his eyes. He didn't understand why, but the melody felt familiar, like something he had heard long ago when his mother used to sing as she cooked or prayed. He closed his eyes and let it fill him. For a moment, the house wasn't broken. It was warm, alive, filled with laughter and footsteps. A man's voice called softly from another room. A woman's laughter answered. A child's giggle echoed up the staircase. Then the sound faded, leaving only wind. Elias opened his eyes. The world was gray again. But the memory remained, pressed into his chest like a small flame that refused to go out. "You're still here?" he said to the empty rooms. "All of you." He walked through the house, touching the walls as he went, tracing the scars and the carvings, the roughness and warmth. Every creak of the floor felt like a reply. In one room he found a table covered with a white sheet. Beneath it, a shape. He lifted the cloth carefully. It was a small wooden box. Dust clung to its corners, but the latch was still strong. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were candles, dozens of them, and used. Some tall, some short, all hand-poured. Their scent was faintly sweet, like beeswax and honey. He took one out, holding it to his nose. A whisper stirred in his ear, so faint he almost thought it was the wind. "Light them when you are ready." He looked around quickly, heart pounding, but no one was there. Only the dog watching him quietly. Elias smiled through the shiver that ran down his spine. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. "Maybe the walls do remember." That night, he lit one of the candles and placed it in the hallway window. Its flame glowed through the cracked glass, casting a small circle of light into the darkness outside. For the first time since the war began, Hollow Street was no longer entirely dark. He sat beside the window, Ash curled at his feet, watching the candle burn. The house creaked gently as though settling into peace. And just before he fell asleep, the hum returned, faint and distant but full of warmth. Not a warning this time. A lullaby. Snow fell all night, veiling Hollow Street in white silence. When Elias awoke, the world outside the cracked windows had turned to glass and light. The candle he'd lit in the window had burned down to a stub, leaving behind a pool of wax like frozen honey. Yet its flame had done something more. It had marked the house. From the street, the faint glow would have looked like a star trapped behind old glass, a promise that life had returned. Ash stretched beside him, tail wagging faintly. The boy smiled and whispered, "Good morning, soldier," as he rubbed the dog's ears. His voice echoed softly through the hall, and to his surprise it was answered, not with words but with a low creak from the floor above, like a footstep. Elias froze. He waited. The sound came again, faint, deliberate. Someone or something was moving upstairs. He took the candle stub and relit it from the dying embers of the fire. Its small flame cast a trembling circle of light. "Stay here," he whispered to Ash. The dog whined but obeyed, watching as the boy climbed the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his weight. Dust drifted from the ceiling like falling snow. The air grew colder with each level, and the faint scent of cedar returned, sharp and nostalgic, like the inside of an old chest. At the end of the hallway, the last door stood slightly ajar. Elias pushed it open with a trembling hand. The room inside was nearly empty, just a bed, a desk, and shelves covered with old rags. But something about it felt different. The light here was softer, almost golden. The walls, though cracked, were warm to the eye as if they remembered laughter. He walked toward the desk. A small wooden cross lay there, half covered in dust. He brushed it clean. Beneath it, etched faintly into the surface, was a single word, "Forgive." Elias traced the letters with his finger. The grain of the wood felt strangely familiar, like the smooth surface of the small table his father once made long ago before the war took everything. His heart began to pound. He lifted his gaze. Behind the desk was a bookshelf filled with old, swollen volumes. Most were unreadable, their pages yellowed, their spines split. But one section of the wall behind them looked wrong. The boards were newer, lighter in color. He reached out and pressed against them. Hello. Ash had followed quietly after all, nose twitching near the base of the shelf. He began pawing the wood, whining softly. You feel it too, Elias murmured. There's something here. He searched for a latch, a hinge, nothing. Finally, he braced his hands on either side of the shelf and pushed. It resisted at first, then shifted slightly, releasing a gust of stale air and dust. Elias coughed, stepping back. Behind it was a narrow door. Barely visible, covered by an old tapestry that had once shown a field of golden wheat. Now the fabric was torn and gray. He pulled it aside. The door was small, almost child-sized, its handle rusted. A symbol had been carved into the wood, 2 hands cupped around a flame. Elias hesitated. He could hear the wind outside, faintly howling through broken shutters. His heart beat in his throat. If this is what you meant, he whispered to the letter still folded in his pocket, then I'm ready. He turned the handle. It opened easily, too easily. The hinges sighed and a faint draft touched his face. Inside was darkness, thick and still. He lifted the candle. Its flame flickered weakly, revealing the outline of a small room. Dust hung in the air like mist. The space was almost empty, save for a single desk against the far wall and a chair beside it. The desk was covered with papers, an unlit oil lamp and a wooden box. Elias stepped inside, the floor groaning underfoot. The smell of cedar was stronger here, mixed with something faintly sweet, like old wax and dried flowers. He placed the candle on the desk. The flame caught the edge of a photograph lying beneath a glass sheet. He leaned closer. The picture showed a man, thin, strong, kind-eyed, standing beside a half-built door. In the background, faint but visible, was the same pale blue color as the one in the cellar. Beside the man stood a woman with a baby in her arms. Elias's breath caught. The baby's eyes, large, gray, searching, were his own. His hand trembled as he reached out and touched the image. The glass was cold, but beneath it, the warmth of memory seemed to breathe. He sank into the chair. Beneath the photograph lay a small book, bound in worn leather. The cover bore a simple carving, a cross surrounded by rays of light. He opened it carefully. The first page was filled with handwriting. To my son Elias. If you are reading this, it means you found your way home. His hands shook. He could barely breathe. The words blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He whispered them aloud as if speaking to the man in the photograph. Father? Ash whined softly, resting his head on Elias's knee. The candle flickered. The walls seemed to sigh. For the first time, Elias didn't feel alone. The whispers that had followed him were no longer frightening. They were familiar. They were home. He turned the page and the words continued. I built this place to shelter others as it once sheltered us. When you find it, remember, light is not meant to be hidden. It must be carried even through ruin. Elias closed the book gently, pressing it to his chest. His heart ached, but it was a holy ache, the kind that comes when loss and grace meet. He looked around the room once more. Everything here had waited, for him, for this moment. The hidden room had finally remembered its purpose. The journal trembled in Elias's hands. Its leather cover was cracked, edges darkened by time, but it still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, the scent of the man in his earliest memories. He sat at the desk in the hidden room, the candlelight quivering over the words his father had written in another life. Ash lay curled beside his chair, eyes half closed, as if sensing that something sacred was about to unfold. The house, too, seemed to hold its breath. No creaks, no whispers, only silence deep and reverent. Elias turned the first fragile page. To my son Elias. If you ever find this, it means you have survived. It means God's mercy still moves in the world. He paused, the words trembling in his chest. The script was neat but heavy, each stroke pressed deep into the paper, written by hands that had known labor and prayer. This house is more than wood and stone. It was once a refuge, a light for those who fled the dark. We built it with our hands and our faith. And when the war came, when the soldiers took everything, this was where I hid the ones who could not run. Elias looked up, his throat tight. He could almost see it, people huddled here in silence, candlelight flickering on faces full of fear and hope. The faint hum he'd heard in the walls wasn't imagination. It was the echo of their prayers, sealed into the wood like breath. He kept reading. They called it the sanctuary of light. We had little food, little warmth. But every night we prayed and somehow the roof held. Every soul who entered found rest, if not in body then in spirit. That was enough. Elias wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. The words carried the weight of someone who had believed even when belief cost everything. When they came for me, I had only time to hide this book in one key. If that key has found you, my son, then you must do what I could not. Rebuild this house. Let it live again, not for profit or pride, but for mercy. He stopped breathing for a moment. The brass key. The door that wouldn't open. The light that had moved toward it as he slept. His father's words were not a farewell, they were a calling. Elias turned another page. Beneath a small drawing of a cross and hammer were more lines, written hastily as if in the last moments before capture. Do not be afraid of silence, Elias. It is where God speaks most clearly. When you light a candle here, you are not alone. Every soul that once prayed in these walls will stand beside you. Remember, faith is not what we see, it's what we keep alive. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the journal. Tears fell silently onto the page, blurring the ink. He pressed his palm over them, whispering, I remember. I remember now. He could see flashes of memory, a man's rough hands guiding his small ones over a block of wood, a gentle voice humming as it carved, the smell of sawdust and bread. He had thought those moments lost to the fire of war. But they had waited for him here, in ink and dust and silence. The candle flickered as a soft draft swept through the room. Elias looked up. The door he had entered through, the hidden one behind the tapestry, had shifted slightly, opening wider. A faint glow spilled in from the hall, though he had not lit another candle there. Ash lifted his head, ears perked. The light grew stronger, golden and warm, filling the corners of the hidden room. Elias rose slowly, clutching the journal to his chest. Father, he whispered, his voice trembling. Is that you? No answer, only the steady hum, now clearer than ever. It filled the air like the echo of a heartbeat. He stepped closer to the doorway. The glow pulsed once, then faded, leaving only the sound of the wind outside. Yet Elias was no longer afraid. The silence was no longer emptiness, it was presence. He returned to the desk and carefully closed the journal. Its weight in his hands felt different now, not as burden but as inheritance. He tied the worn leather strap around it and placed it against his heart. I'll rebuild it, he said softly. I promise. Ash wagged his tail once as if agreeing. Elias looked around the room one last time. The air felt lighter. The faint scent of cedar mingled with something sweeter now, candle smoke and hope. On the desk, beside the cross, a small piece of wood had been left unfinished, a carving half done, the outline of a door surrounded by rays of light. He picked it up and smiled through his tears. We'll finish it together, he whispered. The candle burned low. The house creaked softly, a sound like relief. For the first time since the war, Elias did not feel like a boy lost in the world. He felt like a keeper of something sacred, a memory made flesh again. He blew out the candle and the smoke curled upward like a prayer. The night was colder than any before. Frost crept along the window panes, drawing silver veins across the glass. The wind sang through the chimney, low and mournful, like a hymn carried from another world. But in the hidden room the candle still burned, small, steady, defiant. Elias sat beside it, the journal of his father open across his knees. He had read it a dozen times, tracing each word until it lived inside him. Every page felt like a heartbeat, steady, familiar, alive. Ash lay near the doorway, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. Every now and then his ears would twitch as if he too heard something in the quiet. A whisper, a breath, the stir of souls unseen. Elias turned another page. Near the end, a short note was scrawled in hurried handwriting, barely legible. If you wish to see what was built here, look not to the walls but beneath them. The foundation holds the final truth. He read the line again. Beneath them. The foundation. He rose, heart beating faster. The floorboards beneath the desk looked old but sturdy. He knelt, running his fingers over the gaps between them. Dust clung to his hands and a faint smell of earth rose from below. Ash stood, tail swaying, watching. Elias pressed his ear to the floor. Nothing, only the faint sound of wind outside. Still, something inside him whispered, keep looking. He reached for a small metal tool that had been lying on the desk, a carpenter's chisel, its handle worn smooth. It fit perfectly in his hand as if waiting for this moment. He wedged it between two planks and lifted gently. The board resisted, then loosened with a sharp creak. Beneath it, darkness, and the smell of dry cedar, faintly sweet. He lit another candle and lowered it into the gap. Light spilled across something hidden there. A wooden box, its surface engraved with small crosses and a single word burned into the lid: faith. Elias's breath caught. His hands shook as he pulled it free, brushing away decades of dust. The box was heavier than it looked. Its hinges were rusted, but they gave way easily under his fingers. Inside lay a collection of things humble and sacred. Photographs, black and white, edges curled from time. Letters bound with string. A child's wooden toy carved in the shape of a dove. A piece of fabric embroidered with a small cross. And at the very bottom, a folded envelope with his name written across it. The same handwriting as the first letter that led him here. He opened it carefully. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the ink was dark and alive. My son, if you ever find this, it means the storm has passed. I may not be here to greet you, but you are not alone. This place remembers. It has prayed for you in silence. Elias's vision blurred. He pressed the letter to his lips, his shoulders shaking. Ash whined softly and rested his head on the boy's knee. He continued reading, his voice trembling. You were only a child when I sent you away. I had no choice. The soldiers were coming and I could not let their darkness touch you. I told your mother I would find you again, but the world had other plans. If she is gone now, know that she believed until her last breath that God would bring you home. Tears fell freely now, splashing onto the fragile paper. Elias, if you are reading this, take what remains here and give it back to the world. The people who once prayed in this house, they left their hope behind. Their songs, their laughter, their faith, all buried in these walls. You must unearth it. You must make this place a home again. He stopped reading, clutching the letter against his chest. For a long while he just knelt there, the candle flickering beside him, the smell of cedar thick in the air. The house seemed to exhale, a soft groan passing through the floorboards as though it too had waited for this release. When he could finally breathe again, Elias began to go through the contents of the box. Each photograph told a story, faces smiling despite the hunger in their eyes. One showed a group of children gathered around a man at a workbench. Another showed the house itself, newly built, sunlight on its walls. In the corner of one image, faint but visible, a younger version of his father stood with his hand resting on a small boy's shoulder. Elias recognized himself. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in cloth, was a small wooden carving, a cross intertwined with a branch. He lifted it gently. On its back, carved in small, uneven letters, "To rebuild, begin with forgiveness." He ran his thumb along the carving, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. He whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you, Father. For leaving. For everything." The wind outside shifted. The candle flame bent toward him, then straightened again, brighter than before. Ash barked once, short, sharp, almost like approval. Elias smiled through his tears. The weight that had lived in his chest for years began to lift. He replaced the letters carefully in the box, setting the cross on top. Then he looked at the small hole in the floor, still open, a wound healed by light. "You were never gone," he whispered. "You were just waiting to be found." The candle flickered once more, casting a long beam across the floor, straight toward the blue door in the cellar, waiting quietly below. And in that moment, Elias knew where he had to go next. The wind had died by morning. The world outside Hollow Street was still and white, the sky the color of pearl. Inside, the air felt different, lighter, somehow cleaner, as if the house itself had exhaled its sorrow in the night. Elias stood in the hidden room, the wooden box open before him. He had reread his father's letter until the words had burned into his memory. He traced the cross on the carving once more, whispering, "Begin with forgiveness." The brass key, the journal, the letter, all lay before him now like pieces of a puzzle that pointed toward one last mystery: the blue door in the cellar. He took a deep breath, gathered the box under his arm and began to descend. Each step creaked softly beneath his boots. The air grew cooler as he reached the lower floors, the familiar scent of cedar and smoke returning like a memory. Ash followed close behind, nails clicking against the wood, tail brushing against his leg. At the bottom of the stairs, the blue door waited, still closed, still humming faintly, its edges glimmering in the half-light. The brass key hung heavy around Elias's neck on a string he had made from torn fabric. It felt warm against his skin. He knelt before the door and whispered, "I'm ready now." For a long moment there was only silence. Then, a sound, faint but certain, from the other side. Not the hum this time, but footsteps. Slow, even, human. Ash stiffened, tail low, ears pricked forward. Elias's breath caught. "Who's there?" he called softly. No answer. Only the echo of movement, as if someone were pacing just beyond the wood. He reached for the key and fitted it into the lock. It turned easily, almost too easily, like a heartbeat falling into rhythm. He pushed the handle. The door opened. Light poured through the crack, soft, golden, not blinding but warm like dawn remembered. Elias raised a hand to his face, blinking. When the brightness dimmed, he saw a figure standing in the room beyond. An old man. He was tall but thin, wrapped in a heavy coat that hung loosely from his shoulders. His face was lined with age and soot, but his eyes, deep, kind, unafraid, were full of recognition. In his hands he carried a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "I knew someone would come," the man said softly. His voice was like the crackle of a fire, gentle but alive. "You've been expected, boy." Elias's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The old man smiled faintly. "Once I was a caretaker. Your father and I built this place together. After he was taken, I stayed. I kept watch, waiting for the one who would return." He looked around the cellar, eyes glistening. "And now you're here." Elias stepped closer. "You knew him?" The man nodded slowly. "A good man. Kind, stubborn, faithful. He said this house was meant to shelter Light, and that someday his son would come to finish what he began." He set the loaf of bread down on the table, dusting his hands. "He left this for you." Elias frowned. "For me?" The man pointed to the box Elias carried. "You already found it. That and this bread." He said they belonged together, one for the soul, one for the body. The boy's hands trembled as he unwrapped the loaf. It was fresh, impossibly fresh, the crust golden, the scent rich and warm. "How?" he began, but the old man only smiled. "Some things," he said quietly, "are not meant to be explained. Only received." They sat together at the table. The air was cool but peaceful, the light from the doorway soft and forgiving. Ash lay between them, tail thumping once against the floor. The man broke the bread, handing half to Elias. "Eat, son." It had been days, perhaps weeks, since Elias had tasted anything so real. The first bite filled his mouth with warmth, a sweetness that spread through his chest. He felt his strength return not just to his body but to something deeper. As they ate, the man told him stories, of the refugees his father had sheltered here, of nights filled with prayer and music, of how they had hidden beneath the floor when danger came. He spoke of courage and faith, of mercy that had survived the war. Elias listened, the journal resting open beside him. When the bread was gone, the man stood. "You've done what he asked. You found the light. But there's still so much I don't understand," Elias said. "The door, the voices, the letters." The man smiled, laying a hand on his shoulder. "Understanding comes later. Faith comes first." Elias looked down, blinking back tears. When he looked up again, the man was gone. Only the faint scent of bread remained, and the light, still shining from the room beyond. He rose, stepping through the blue door. The space inside was small but bright. On the far wall hung a wooden cross, simple and hand-carved. Beneath it, a bench and an old Bible open to a single verse. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Elias knelt before it, the dog resting quietly at his side. The air felt alive around him, as if every soul that had ever prayed here breathed with him still. He whispered, "Father, I found it. The sanctuary. I'll keep it alive." The wind outside shifted, carrying the faint echo of a voice, his father's, gentle as memory. "You're home now." Elias closed his eyes and smiled through his tears. For the first time he believed it. If this chapter warmed your spirit, please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. My dream is to reach 1,000 hearts who still believe that light can return even after war. When Elias awoke, the light had changed. It no longer crept shyly through cracks or hid behind clouds. It flooded the room, golden, clean, alive. For the first time, Hollow Street was not gray. The morning sun streamed through the shattered windows, scattering a mosaic of colors across the walls. Each fragment of glass caught the light differently, crimson, amber, blue, painting the air in quiet glory. Dust motes floated through it like stars. Elias sat up slowly, hardly daring to move. For a moment, it felt as though heaven itself had bent low enough to touch the house. Ash stirred beside him, stretching and shaking his fur. His eyes gleamed like polished coal, reflecting the new light. The boy smiled, rubbing his head. "We made it, didn't we?" The dog wagged his tail once, and in that small motion, Elias felt the truth of it. The storm was over. The silence had spoken. The house, his father's house, was no longer dead. He rose and walked toward the blue door, now standing open. The air that drifted through it was warm, carrying the faint scent of fresh bread and cedar. On the table where he and the old man had eaten the night before lay the same loaf, untouched, whole again as if renewed by unseen hands. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The house creaked softly as though answering. He spent the morning exploring the rooms he had once feared. Each one was still cracked and broken, yet the light softened everything it touched. Dust no longer seemed like decay, it shimmered like gold caught midair. In the kitchen the old copper kettle gleamed faintly. In the hall the crooked mirror reflected not ruin but hope. He stopped by the window where he had first lit the candle days before. The wax had melted into the sill, leaving a rough circle of amber. Outside, snow melted slowly on the cobblestones, revealing patches of green beneath. He whispered, "It's coming back to life." Ash barked once and darted toward the stairs. Elias followed, laughing quietly for the first time in what felt like years. The sound startled him. Laughter in this house felt like a kind of prayer. Downstairs, near the cellar, he heard movement again, not the ghostly hum of before but real footsteps. He paused, heart quickening. When he turned the corner, the old man was there again, sitting near the blue door, hands folded. "You're still here?" Elias said, voice trembling. The man smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You didn't think I'd leave before saying goodbye?" Elias hesitated, stepping closer. You brought the bread back?" The man chuckled softly. "No, my boy. The house did. It gives back what faith has earned. You've woken it up." They sat together in the sunlight streaming through the cellar window. Dust danced in slow motion, each particle glowing. The man spoke gently. "Your father always said this place would heal the broken if someone cared enough to light a candle again. You did more than that. You brought the dawn." Elias's eyes burned with tears. "I didn't do it alone." He looked toward Ash, who wagged his tail and rested his head on the man's knee. "No," the man agreed. "None of us ever do." They sat in silence for a while, the warmth of the morning wrapping around them like a blanket. Then the man stood, his shadow long and soft against the wall. "It's time for me to go," he said. Elias rose quickly. "Will I see you again?" The man smiled faintly. "Every time you open that door. Every time you feed someone who's hungry. Every time you choose to forgive." He turned toward the light spilling through the cracks in the wall. For a heartbeat, the rays bent around him, and Elias thought he saw something impossible. A carpenter's hammer hanging from the man's belt, glinting gold. The boy blinked and the man was gone. Only light remained. Elias stood alone in the cellar, heart steady. He walked to the table, broke the loaf of bread and shared it with Ash. "We'll start today," he said softly. "We'll fix the windows, clear the dust, and make this place a home again." He carried the first piece of bread to the front door and placed it on the step, a quiet offering for whoever might come next. Snow fell lightly, catching the morning sun like scattered diamonds. When he looked back inside, the light was everywhere, spilling through broken glass, reflected in puddles, resting gently on the cross above the blue door. He whispered, "You built it for others, Father. I'll keep it that way." The wind stirred softly, almost like a sigh. For a moment, it sounded like his father's voice again, carried on the morning air. "Good. Then the house is alive." And Elias smiled, not the small, uncertain smile of a refugee, but the wide, unguarded smile of someone who had found his place in the world again. He looked at Ash and said, "Come on, boy. We've got work to do." And together they stepped into the light. Spring arrived quietly on Hollow Street. The snow melted in soft sighs, leaving behind small rivers that glistened through the cracks in the cobblestones. Grass pushed through the earth again, shy and trembling, as if testing whether the world was safe to bloom. The wind no longer carried the scent of ash, but of rain and soil, the smell of things being made new. And in the old building that once held only ghosts, the sound of life returned. Elias knelt by the open door, sunlight warming his back. He was mending a window frame, his hands rough but steady. Ash lay nearby, tail thumping lazily, watching the birds that had begun to nest in the eaves. The boy's coat was still patched and frayed, but his eyes, they were bright now, alive, full of purpose. Inside, the blue door to the cellar stood open, letting in the light. The air smelled of wood shavings, candle wax, and bread. Every day since that morning of light, Elias had worked, not just to repair but to restore. He swept the floors, scrubbed the walls, fixed the hinges, patched the roof with what he scavenged from fallen houses nearby. At night, he slept near the fire, the journal of his father always beside him. He no longer feared the whispers. They had changed. They were no longer warnings or songs of sorrow. They were blessings, the gentle creaks and murmurs of a house breathing again. Word had begun to spread through the nearby villages. A light on Hollow Street, people said. A boy rebuilding the house that once sheltered the lost. And slowly they began to come. A mother and child seeking warmth, an old man needing rest, a family passing through with nowhere to go. Elias welcomed each one with bread, with fire, with silence and kindness. He never asked where they came from. He simply said, "You can stay for as long as you need." And always before they left, he would press something into their hands, a candle from the box he had found upstairs. "Light it when you're afraid," he'd say. "It will remind you that there's still warmth in the world." One evening, as dusk settled over the hills, Elias sat by the window watching the golden light fade to amber. The room glowed softly, candles lined the shelves, their flames dancing like small hearts. The cross above the window caught the light, its shadow stretching long across the floor. He opened his father's journal again, running his fingers over the last page. The ink was faint, but he could still read it. "When the world forgets kindness, build again. When hope grows cold, light another candle. When you can no longer hear my voice, remember, faith is not a wall, it's a door." He smiled through tears. "I found your door, Father," he whispered. "And I walked through it." Outside, a group of travelers approached. A woman, her child, and an old man with a cane. Elias stepped into the yard to greet them. The woman hesitated at first, her eyes wary. "We heard this place takes people in," she said softly. "Is it true?" Elias nodded. "It's true." The child peeked from behind her skirt, eyes wide. "Is this where the light comes from?" Elias laughed gently, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "Yes," he said. "And now it comes from you too." He led them inside. The fire was already lit. The bread, always somehow fresh, waited on the table wrapped in cloth. Ash wagged his tail and curled near the hearth as the boy offered them seats. That night, the house was full of warmth again. Soft laughter, quiet voices, the sound of spoons against bowls. The walls glowed with the reflection of the flames. The cracks in the glass no longer looked like scars. They looked like veins of light. When everyone had gone to sleep, Elias stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars scattered like dust over the deep blue. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. He looked back at the house, his house, and smiled. A single candle still burned in the upstairs window. Its light reached far down Hollow Street, touching every broken wall and forgotten stone. He whispered into the wind, "You were right, Father. Light doesn't end, it only moves." Ash pressed against his leg, looking up at him. Elias knelt and scratched behind his ears. "We'll keep it burning, won't we?" The dog wagged his tail, and together they stood in silence, watching the house glow softly in the dark. From somewhere deep within the walls came the faintest echo, not a hum this time but a voice warm and sure, "Well done, my son." Elias closed his eyes. He didn't need to see. He could feel it, the presence, the peace, the completion. The house was alive again. And with it so was he. If this story touched your soul, please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. My dream is to reach 1,000 hearts who still believe that light can rebuild the world. One small house, one small act of kindness at a time.